Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Saturday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you here on the 17th of May. It's always a good idea to check the latest weather happenings online anytime at weather.gov/Alaska, or go to weather.gov and click on Alaska. That'll take you to your nearest weather service office that serves your community and village in Alaska. Of course, NOAA Weather Radio is a good way to go. You can always check the batteries and make sure your radio is working if you haven't in a while. A good plan any time of the year. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each weather service office on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And if you've checked lately on Twitter, NWS Anchorage, we shared some record high temperature information with you about Kodiak today. Kodiak, one of the hot spots in all of Alaska, with temperatures soaring to about 77 degrees by last hour or so. That's just a few degrees off of their all-time record high in the 80s and only 3 degrees shy of tapping the all-time record high for May, which is 80 degrees. So pretty toasty day there in Kodiak. Hopefully all of you didn't sizzle and fry away this afternoon. Southeast, the fire danger has been reprieved, at least for now. No red flag warnings up for you, but we see those standing for the Copper River Basin, Susitna Valley, the Kodiak Island area. Again, we'll see that for tomorrow as well, and for areas around King Salmon and the Bristol Bay region. So winds and low humidity combined, creating a dangerous wind or wildfire danger for many in South Central. Again, for some tomorrow, including Kodiak, that threat will be back again as the frontal boundary is working through. Up across the north, it's not fire danger, it's winter danger. More snow coming for the northeastern parts of the Brooks Range. A winter storm warning there, and for the eastern part of the Beaufort Seacoast. For the Brooks Range, it looks like 6 to 12 inches of snow is possible for you. And no, I'm not kidding. And for the eastern parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, you're looking at up to 6 inches of snow. So winter storm warnings for the North Slope. That'll go into Sunday night. And meanwhile, the fire danger continues across a large part of the central and southern parts of Alaska. The orange indicates high fire danger there, where conditions in the grass remain pretty high and burnable. And for the red shaded areas, extreme fire danger continues. The good news is, as a cold front is just now reaching the Chukchi Seacoast and moving inland, that's going to drop temperatures significantly in some cases, enough for snow as you just saw, but also lower or increase the humidity. So with cooler temperatures, a little bit of wind at least to start, and then that subsides, and then higher relative humidities, a lot of the fire danger, at least for a while, will probably subside. Let's take a look at the storm pattern now. Out across the areas west of the Bering Strait, you can see cloud cover building here. This is still a pretty decent tap of Pacific moisture working across the western Aleutians, but right now it's still being held back by a ridge of high pressure sitting across the southern Bering Sea. The good news is some of this moisture is working its way into western Alaska. It's kind of have to snake its way across the Bering. It's not a direct path, which would be a lot easier and a lot more efficient. But for right now, you can see some of that moisture is working its way up and over the ridge and into the Seward Peninsula and into northern parts of Alaska. And guess what that's feeding? The snow chance again across the north and eastern Brooks Range. Let's take a look at the visible satellite picture here. Nothing but dry air across southwest and south central Alaska. Kodiak Island in the clear, and look at that again. 77 warm degrees there. In some cases, probably even warmer inland. Across southeast, scattered clouds, a lot of low stratus and fog probably across the Gulf of Alaska, and certainly some holes across the islands. We saw some pictures out around Adak today, and it looked like nothing but high clouds. A beautiful day if you're in the right spot in the Aleutians. Otherwise, it's fog and stratus, and again, more ship tracks there between Adak, Kiska, and Shemya. South of St. Paul, looks like the sky cleared up a little bit. Not as bad around St. Paul and St. George, perhaps today as it was in previous days, but you can still see plenty of low clouds there. One more time for the visible satellite picture, and watch as the clouds develop across the central and northwestern interior. And here comes the frontal boundary. By later tonight, temperatures will be cooling down. And for those of you watching in the valley and you're concerned about frost, chances are at this point it looks like we're going to be talking about wind staying up just enough where we're not looking at a hard freeze across south central, and many of you have already started your planting for the season. And again, looks like things will be changing a little bit for the cooler, but probably not a substantial hard and cold freeze. For tonight's weather then, look out to the north and west. That is our weather maker. You'll notice that's already working its way across the Chukchi Seacoast through the Seward Peninsula. Rain across areas east of Barrow today in New Ixet. To the west, it's already been snow for places like Wainwright, south and west of Point Hope and Point Lay. A few showers maybe across the YK Delta, but really there hasn't been a whole lot to look at just yet. Now as we get into tonight, the front's going to sweep south and east fairly quickly. With that comes a change in the wind direction that you'll probably notice if you're standing outside. You're not going to see that big blue line with triangles pass over, but you can feel that wind shift, and the wind will probably feel a little bit different as those temperatures begin to fall off. As you look up across the north slope, snow will fly, especially for the northeastern Brooks Range. Again, 6 to 12 inches there with a winter storm warning, and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast also under a winter storm warning. High pressure remains intact across the southern Bering. That's going to lock in some areas of fog and stratus, as you would imagine, and keep that Pacific moisture feed intact across the western Bering. Shemya occasionally being grazed by that. A few areas of scattered showers across the southern parts of southeast, and by Sunday the front is still crawling its way eastward now, running into a little bit more stable weather pattern and having a harder time speeding its way through that. Of course, rough terrain also interrupts the flow a little bit. The front will slowly work across Kodiak Island, and as it does so, the winds are going to stay up. Because of that, the red flag warning will likely still be in place because of the wind and because of the fuels in place and because of the relative low humidity. Chances of rain with this for south central and southwest, including Kodiak Island, don't look that great. So you're seeing the front, you're seeing the moisture build in across the north slope, thinking maybe this will kind of douse some of the wildfire danger around most of southern Alaska. Chances are it's not going to do a whole lot. So we will see cooler temperatures, but we're not going to see a huge reprieve that will last any length of time. We still need a lot of places to have a substantial green up. Up across the north slope, snow will continue throughout the day, but gradually that back edge of the precipitation will work its way from west to east. And by Sunday night and into early Monday, a lot of that will be across the Alcan border. High pressure sitting south and west of the Pribilofs. You'll see spotty areas of rainfall. Most of that, again, well to the west, but even west of Kiska and Attu at times. And the front continues to drop southward. A few areas of rain start to pick up into more rain for south and east. That becomes a little more widespread, with the frontal boundary making its way across a large part of southeastern Alaska throughout the day Monday and into Tuesday. Behind that, drier air is moving in fairly quickly. The cloud shield and the precipitation, for that matter, will quickly move into the western part of Yukon. High pressure south and west of the Pribilofs, pretty much where it's been for the last week or so. It's really not going to move for any great weather pattern. It's going to have to be something really substantial, it looks like. And colder air starts to mass once again across the northern coastline of eastern Asia. As you look in ahead to Tuesday and Wednesday, we have another round of colder air making its way toward the Arctic coast. In the meantime, drier weather starts to build back into south central, but it does not look to be anywhere nearly as warm as it has been for most of the last week. Temperatures today, just amazing. If you're looking at southeast and you've had 60s and 70s this week, it's a little bit cooler across the southern parts of the inner waterways where we've had a few more clouds and maybe a sprinkle or two, but beyond that, just amazing weather in Juneau today. 64 degrees, 56 in Sitka, 58 around Yakutat. Look at Cordova, 72, 76 at 3 o'clock there in Kodiak. 4 o'clock it was even warmer around Prince William Sound, mid-60s. Anchorage was 69. Temperature today made it up to 73, I believe. That's a new record high. 71 in Talkeetna. The Valley was beautiful, 59 in Homer, 62 in Seward, 67 in Glen Ellen, Northway and Eagle, both in the 60s. And Fairbanks today, 65 around 3 o'clock, 60 in Fort Yukon. And you can see some of the changes taking place on the North Slope already. However, it was fairly mild across the eastern parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, mid to upper 30s there. Barrow was 34, Kotzebue Sound in the low to mid 30s, and 28 around Point Lay. 34 around Nome today. The YK Delta showing temperatures in the 30s and 40s. Bethel just shy of 50 degrees at the 3 o'clock hour. Got a little bit warmer there. Mid-60s around Bristol Bay, and Cape Newenham 39 degrees. 43 in St. Paul and the Alaska Peninsula in the 40s and 50s. Sandpoint was 55, Cold Bay 44, and the central and western part of the chain in the 30s and 40s as well. So the warmest weather certainly in south central, the interior, and parts of southeast. Overnight low temperatures stay mild ahead of that frontal boundary. And in fact, Kodiak could hover around 46 tonight, about the same for southeast. For south central, mid-40s should do the trick. The interior, near 40 degrees in Fairbanks. North and west, though, temperatures drop off fairly quickly. 32 in Galena. 20s for the Brooks Range, the Arctic coast, anywhere from 20 to about 28 around Kodiak. Or, I'm sorry, let me try that one more time. Kaktovik, there, they got the right Cadent Village for you. Around Kotzebue Sound, mid-20s. Nome looking at 29 degrees. The YK Delta in the mid to upper 30s. Bristol Bay again closer to the mid-40s. Dutch Harbor on Alaska 41, coming up to 45 tomorrow afternoon. Southwest, upper 40s to mid-50s around Bristol Bay. South Central cooling into the lower to mid-60s, so substantially different tomorrow. Southeast, upper 50s to about 60 degrees around Juneau. The North Slope likely hovering in the mid to upper 20s tomorrow. Fairbanks about 53. Flying weather is going to change from northwest to south and east. However, because of the lack of moisture, a lot of places will not see heavy flight category restrictions, as you might imagine with this type of weather system. But IFR conditions are expected to cross a broad area of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, so watch for changes there and watch for some changes in the mountain passes tomorrow. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass likely going from IFR to MVFR and slowly seeing improvements, but it may be slow, especially on the north side. Again, IFR probably to start. Now, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will be some of these southern passes that don't see a whole lot of restrictions. You might flirt with MVFR at times. Rainy Pass will probably lean over toward MVFR during the afternoon a little bit as clouds build in, but you're not expecting a whole lot of wet weather. We'll see similar conditions in Windy, and Isabel Pass will probably see some improvements first. Mentasta Pass we're going to leave at VFR for right now. Tanita Pass may lean over toward MVFR conditions, and Portage Pass probably heading toward MVFR at least for a time tomorrow. It may be relatively brief, and Chilkoot and White Pass for right now looking at VFR. Freezing levels, well, here comes the change. You can see the surface freezing line taking a dive towards southwest in the interior, and with that goes the upper level warm air as well, being pushed southward. Here's that ridge of really warm air right across the Aleutians and the southern part of the Alaskan Peninsula, and really over southeast as well. So it's not gone yet, but it's in the process of heading out the door. Tomorrow's icing potential will generally be up north below 6,000 feet. Most of that light to isolated moderate, except for a few cases that might go a little bit closer to occasional. Out across the Copper River Basin to the Yukon, below 9,000 feet, but above 4. So again, you're going to have to work pretty hard to find some icing potential there. Here's the jet stream. We've got a trough of low pressure across the Pacific Northwest and the Eastern Pacific. And here's our ridge that is just living large there across the southern Bering Sea. Fastest moving winds now starting to come around the capes of southwest Alaska, and that's encouraging that colder air to drop southward right now. Underneath that, you can see a pretty pronounced west and northwesterly flow working down the west coast through the Seward Peninsula, 20 to 25 knots, a 40-knot flow across the southern tip of the AK Pen, and wind speeds pretty light across the eastern interior, and for that matter also across southeastern Alaska. A little bit of a different orientation at 3,000 feet, not much, but maybe enough to count. A northwesterly flow, 20 to 25 knots for most of the west and the YK Delta. Northerlies coming in across the Beaufort Seacoast, 10 to about 15 knots, and for southeast, wind speeds really light, under 10 knots in most cases there, even with an additional area of low pressure just outside of Prince William Sound. The high, as you guessed it, hasn't moved much at 3,000 feet across the southern Bering. So turbulence potential looks pretty spotty tomorrow. You may find some low-level wind shear in the vicinity of the front, but for southwest Alaska, and I would say also watch Kodiak Island below 6,000 feet. There's probably going to be some channeled winds working through and off the range, and maybe a wave setting up. So watch for at least some light to isolated moderate in that area. And if you're flying eastward out of the interior, perhaps north of the Wrangell St. Elias, maybe some chop there, and also across the western Bering, anywhere around Shemya or into the western Bering Sea. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Everybody has observed flooding at some time, either firsthand or in the media. More people lose their lives in floods than in any other weather-related event. Related flood damages exceed $3 billion each year. The Great Flood of 1993 caused over $15 billion in damages across the upper Midwest. Similar floods from excessive rainfall associated with tropical storms or hurricanes attract much media attention and contain few surprises. These floods occur over days and weeks, while short-duration, intense rainfall events produce flash floods. Flash floods can roll boulders the size of cars, tear out trees, destroy buildings and bridges, and pose a significant threat to human lives. Flash floods can occur in what is normally a dry creek bed. A hidden danger awaits motorists where a road without a bridge dips across a creek bed. This is called a low water crossing. Low water crossings represent a hidden danger because flooding occurs in an area that people normally and frequently pass through. Few people appreciate the power of running water. Even fewer realize how fast water can rise in a small stream and flood a highway, creating a dangerous situation. A similar dangerous situation occurs for motorists who drive through low drainage areas flooded by standing water. Floods and flash floods are costly to human life and property. Nearly half of the flood-related deaths that occur each year are vehicle-related, and damages to vehicles can easily exceed $1 million. Although many of the highway dips that become low-water crossings are identified as potential flood areas, people do not understand the hidden dangers, and lives are needlessly lost. Dr. Susan Zevin, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Operations at the National Weather Service, will discuss why low-water crossings can be so dangerous to motorists.
Well, water weighs 62.4 pounds per cubic foot. What does that mean? That's the equivalent of 2 cinder blocks that can hit you in your knees going at 10 miles an hour. When a vehicle stalls in the water's momentum is transferred to the car. So for each foot that the water rises, 500 pounds of force on the side are applied to the car. Buoyancy is the biggest factor. For each foot of water that the water rises, it displaces 1,500 pounds that your car weighs, so that your car will weigh 1,500 pounds less than it did before. You can lose control of your car in 2 feet of water. And in smaller cars, you can lose control of the car in 6 inches of water.
Why do so many people needlessly lose their lives in flooding at road dips and low water crossings? People have extreme confidence in the size and weight of their vehicle. Many people interviewed, such as Charles Lovett, expressed surprise at the force of the water.
I tried to charge through the water, and I got about right here when the truck just stopped dead, and I panicked a little bit here, and it started to move a couple of inches, a couple of feet. As we moved down into the stream here and we started to get carried away, it wasn't a floating sensation, it was as if we were completely out of control.
The difference in many cases is inches. Those people who have at various times repeatedly driven through a flooded low water crossing do not recognize the danger of a small increase in the water level. The second misconception is the past history involved in driving through a low-water crossing.
I thought it wasn't deep, but I guess it got deep.
Sign said don't go through here when it's flooded.
Oh, I know, but I went through here before, and it was not even deep at all.
The third misconception is the idea that driving fast through a low-water crossing will enable the driver to arrive safely on the other side. It's simply not true. The faster a driver attempts to cross a road covered with water, the less contact he has with the road. Once the vehicle begins to hydroplane, it begins to float, and control of the vehicle is lost. Making the situation worse, more than half of all low-water crossing vehicular-related deaths take place at night when visibility is limited. Under these conditions, the vulnerability of the driver and passengers to the hidden danger is greatly magnified. The existence of low-water crossings is very prevalent throughout the United States, especially in the Southwest, where many low-water crossings exist. There are things you can do to reduce the risk of becoming a low-water crossing fatality.
Heed all flood and flash flood warnings issued by the National Weather Service. Do not drive around barricades at low water crossings. Be especially vigilant at night or when traveling on unfamiliar roads. Do not cross flowing water. Observe rising water indicators at low water crossings. Remember, as little as 6 inches of water may cause you to lose control of your car. Be aware that roadbeds may be washed away under the floodwaters. If you choose to abandon your vehicle, respect the force of the water. Remember, just 6 inches of fast-moving water will knock you off your feet.
Floods and flash floods will continue to occur. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and its National Weather Service, has the mission to provide river and flood forecasts and warnings to the nation. But the warnings are only effective if the people know and understand the dangers of floods. Rising waters over roadways pose a threat to life, save lives and property. Don't take chances with hidden dangers at low water crossings.
All right, looking at the weather in southeast Alaska, you'll have more of a southerly flow than anything else. That's ahead of that frontal boundary crossing through the mainland of Alaska. South and southeasterly winds coming up the coast anywhere from 15 to about 20 knots. Should produce about 4 to 5 foot seas in most areas. Across the inner waterways, you're looking at 15-knot winds, more of a southwesterly flow making it through Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage. A northwesterly flow coming through some of the southern inner waterways. The Lynn Canal looking at a steady southerly wind, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. And once you get into Monday, a little bit of a shift in the wind, but still overall dealing with southerly winds, 15 to 20 knots across the inner waterways, 25 to maybe some 20-knot winds a little bit further south, 5 to 6 foot seas for the coastal areas, and 3 to 4 foot seas for the inner waterways. Across south central, expect change in the wind and some higher gusts, especially around the Barren Islands where we have gale warnings up at this point. 35-knot winds there coming through that constriction. Otherwise, north and northwesterly winds inside and outside of Prince William Sound. Down the Cook Inlet, north and northwesterly flow, 15 knots. Again, that's picking up though as you run into the winds coming through the Barren Islands region. Northwesterlies coming over Kodiak Island, might have some stronger winds in that area, but again, high fire danger probably in that region because of the winds and because of the lack of the moisture at that time. 5 to 7 foot seas on either side of Kodiak. As we get into Monday, the winds diminish somewhat in just about all areas. One place that we're not going to see a huge change initially is going to be east of the Barrens. 35-knot winds with an 11-foot sea, higher gusts expected there. 15 to 20-knot winds coming up inside and outside of Prince William Sound. Probably some higher gusts coming out of the Copper River Valley and northerlies down the Cook Inlet, about 25 knots with a 7-foot sea there. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 25-knot winds on the north side of Cold Bay, 6-foot seas there. Northwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay, 25 knots are expected. Higher gusts again south of Kodiak Island from Castle Cape out to Chignik, 30 knots with a 6-foot sea, and higher gusts down the coastline as well on the Pacific side, 25 knots sustained with a 5-foot sea. Winds diminish and become a little more northerly as you get into Monday. Northwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 6-foot sea, and still looking at some higher gusts there around Chignik, 30 knots with a 7-foot sea. Across the Aleutians, a north and northeasterly flow from Unalaska all the way out toward Adak, 10 to 15 knots on the Bering side, 15 to 20 knots on the Pacific side with 5 to 6 foot seas there, 2 to 3 foot seas across the Bering side, maybe as high as 4 between Nikolsky and Unalaska, and east and southeasterly winds on the return side of that high pressure system parked right about here. So about 25-knot winds there around Shemya with an 11-foot sea. That diminishes to 9 feet by Monday. North and easterly winds continue across the Bering at 15 to 20 knots, maybe a little lower across the Pacific side with 5-foot seas there. And for Kiska, a 15-knot wind on a 6-foot sea expected for Monday. Across the west coast, a westerly flow coming right across the Pribilofs may turn just a little bit more to the northwest the farther south you get. Northwesterlies cutting across Nunivak Island, 15 to 25 knots, and westerlies coming into Norton Sound around 2 feet or so. That shifts to more of a southwesterly direction on Monday. You can see the west and northwesterlies cutting across Nunivak Island, 6-foot seas in Kuskokwim Bay, 3-foot seas coming into St. Paul with a northerly wind, light but still north at 10 knots, and 15-knot winds from the west across the St. Matthew Island waters. For the Chukchi Seacoast, you're looking at 10 to 15 knots on Sunday. The Beaufort Seacoast, 20 to 25 knots, so some stronger winds there on top of any snow that's still falling across the northeastern Brooks Range there. Winter storm warnings for you and for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast with 6 to 12 inches there for the higher terrain. And Monday, a southerly flow returns back over the Bering Strait, 15 to as high as 25 knots north of Barrow, and then the winds start to diminish there for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast as the frontal boundary peels out and the low pressure system moves away. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings are in effect for the northeastern Brooks Range. Again, for the higher terrain, you're looking at 6 to 12 inches closer to the coast and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, including places like Kaktovik. Snow amounts could include 6 inches or so. You're looking at those winter storm warnings going till about 10 o'clock on Sunday. Now for areas southward, the winds are changing. Colder air will sweep across from the Chukchi Seacoast into the west coast, Norton Sound, and into the interior starting tonight and into early tomorrow. As that works across, though, the winds and low humidity will continue for places like Kodiak Island, where red flag warnings are expected to stay up. Expect a scant amount of showers across the central and southern parts of Alaska. Just not enough moisture there. You might see some showers in the higher terrain. Most areas, though, are not going to get a good chance for rainfall. That will be limited to more northerly latitudes around the interior and farther north where rain and snow may mix together in places like Fort Yukon. A few areas of light rain across southeast, and fog, drizzle, and low clouds will continue across the Bering Sea and parts of the Aleutians. Getting into Sunday, low pressure moves into the northern Gulf. You start to see a little more cloud cover across southeast. Rain showers diminish. You might still have a few around the Copper River Basin, the central and eastern interior, and snow continues for the north and eastern Arctic coast. By Monday, the front's moving closer to southeast with a better chance of rain and clearing out in the west. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. Enjoy your Sunday.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.